I was just feeling disconnected from my passion for architecture that I developed at a very early age. And I actually discovered a book that really resonated with me. I think most people find themselves through The Alchemist. I found what I was looking for in a book called Heating, Cooling, and Lighting by Norbert Lechner.
Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. You can also check out our Reimagined Buildings YouTube channel for some great inspiration for both building new or renovating. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Tamaki, Makaurau. Also, Middle-earth, which is a bit of a context drop for today's podcast. And I'm joined by Mary. Mary, where are you in the world?
I am on Lopez Island in Washington State, and it's really gorgeous here today.
It looks lovely, and I know that part of the world is a very lovely place to be. So I'm glad you can join us. And Ilka, are you back home?
Yeah, I'm in Philadelphia.
And you've been traveling around recently looking at some Passive House projects?
Well, yeah, we've been doing some video recording, but we've been doing it in Philadelphia, actually. So there are some really interesting projects here, and hopefully we'll see them on the YouTube channel soon.
Excellent. Yeah, looking forward to that. Well, it's just the three of us this week, and really excited to get into an interview that the two of you did with our friends at Collective Carpentry. But before we do that, just do a quick shout out to our sponsors, the supporters of the Passive House Accelerator. Thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Bax Ingwe Architects, Glavel Foam Glass, Minotaur, Mitsubishi Electric, Partel, Rockwall, Stowe, and Zola Windows. Our champion sponsors are Buisco, Gradient, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, PH Air Seal, Prosco, and Source 2050. And a big shout out to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA. Thank you to all of them, also our other patron sponsors, and of course to all our amazing listeners and audience out there. All right, let's get into this week's interview. Ilka, how did this come about? Because we have had Collective Carpentry on various, they've been involved with the Passive House Accelerator before, and a lot of our listeners will be familiar with their work. How did you come about this interview?
Well, we've been working with Collective Carpentry quite a bit, and I just think they're such a fantastic company, and I was really, really happy to see their approach of the model homes design. Yeah. So, and Heather is actually the in-house designer, and she came up with all those model home designs, and yeah, we wanted to hear a little bit more about it.
Well, let's get into it, because Heather Mott also explains how she got involved with Collective Carpentry and Passive House Accelerator's influence on that. So here she is, your chat with Heather Mott of Collective Carpentry.
Welcome, Heather Mott, in-house designer and Passive House consultant for Collective Carpentry, to the Passive House Accelerator podcast. It's great to have you join us.
Thank you. Thanks for the warm welcome. I'm happy to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to work for Collective Carpentry and how long you've been there?
It was actually through the Passive House Accelerator that I discovered Collective Carpentry. So thanks to this great team. I was interested in Passive House, and I was working on my certification with Andrew Peel. And this was in maybe 2019. So the Passive House Accelerator was really picking up some momentum. And the Passive House Accelerator just had so many great resources for diving into the community. I was attending all the happy hours, reading all the articles. There was a virtual prefab summit where Yan, who is my current boss, was speaking on the advantages of prefab in Passive House. And I thought, well, this is a cool guy. So I sent him an application and a very, passionately written why I was such a fan of prefab and why Passive House, the combination is so great. And, they were not hiring a designer at the time. They were not looking for anybody. But one thing they are always looking for is to build a more passionate team, because all of Passive House, prefab, all these things can be learned. But passion is something that really makes a team great. And so I was fortunate that they saw this enthusiasm and hired me, and they kind of found a place for me. And since then, we've really built out the design side of Collective Carpentry. We just released our pre-designed plans, which ultimately became my job to do at Collective. We recognized pretty quickly the advantages of having our own in-house designs, building in the efficiency and offering clients to come directly to us is really great. So we released those pre-designed plans about a year ago, and we've got one built in Bozeman, Montana, and we have a few others on the way.
That's great. It's nice to hear that the accelerator had an influence on your career. I love hearing that.
And I think, Mary, that's actually when we met as well, right?
Right.
Yeah, and decided to start doing this podcast together.
Right. And how did you decide that Passive House was something that you were interested in?
I guess I discovered the advantages. I was sort of feeling a little bit disconnected from architecture. I wanted it to have a deeper purpose, a deeper meaning. And I was an early, junior level architect, and I was just feeling disconnected from my passion for architecture that I developed at a very early age. And I actually discovered a book that really resonated with me. I think most people find themselves through The Alchemist. I found what I was looking for in a book called Heating, Cooling, and Lighting by Norbert Lechner. And the premise of the book is this 3-tier approach to sustainable design, where priority is given to optimizing a building for passive heating and cooling and minimizing your mechanical systems. And of course, that directly led me to Passive House, and I was hooked. So soon after that, I went on to get my CPHC training with Andrew Peel.
Can you tell us a little bit about what Collective Carpentry is and what you do there?
So we are a panelized prefabrication company. We're based out of Invermere, which is British Columbia, and we provide high performance panels for the West Coast, primarily, of the US and Canada. And for those of you who aren't familiar with panelized prefab, we build the building enclosure as panels in our shop. And this includes the walls, floors, roofs. We build the panels about the size of a step deck trailer and ship them to site. And to install, we do all of our own installs on site. For a typical single family home, takes 1 or 2 weeks. And this is really important for Passive House because it's the above ground building enclosure system. And we sometimes also install the windows, but as we all know, lead times are nearly impossible to coordinate. So if we do install the windows also, then we'll do the blower door tests while we're there.
So you do specialize on high performance or Passive House with foam-free assemblies, is that correct?
Yeah, Passive House is our building standard, although not very many of our projects go all the way through certification. It's really nice that our standard is Passive House because it's one less thing that we need to convince clients to do when they come to us. by the time someone comes to us, they want us to build their house, they've already done their homework, they've already decided that they want to build better than code. So that's nice. And, when all projects usually go through some form of a cost-cutting phase. So our lowest R value wall that we'll do is still double what code minimum is in where I'm based, which is Washington State. And, when our standard is the minimum is twice of what the code minimum is, we know that the performance is not going to be sacrificed because it's embedded in our system. And yeah, you mentioned with the wood-based, of course, also are conscious of embodied carbon. And it's a pretty easy equation. Wood is good, concrete, steel, foam, bad. So that's what we use. We have all wood-based and cellulose in our wall assemblies.
Yeah, and you developed a very specific wall assembly, correct, with I-joist. Can you talk about that a little bit to get the maximum amount of R value into your walls?
Yeah, so our bread and butter is this wall assembly that has, starting inboard is a 2x6 structural layer that is installed, not insulated, so that you can run services through there. And then beyond that is our 1/2-inch plywood air barrier. So all the seams are taped. If there are any penetrations through that, sealed properly. And then beyond that is the I-joist, typically 9.5-inch. You can, of course, scale up for more R value. And we dense pack cellulose in the I-joist cavity. And then outboard of that, we have our WRB membrane. Right now, we really like Proclima membranes. We use the Crew at 475 as our supplier. So a Mento membrane on the outside. And then beyond that, we have a rain screen. So 3/4-inch strapping rain screen.
I feel like there's this natural fit between Passive House and pre-manufacturing too, because once you get so interested into the how to make a building, which is necessary in order to pursue Passive House, I feel like it's such a natural kind of progression to then look into the pre-manufacturing world. Is that what happened to you as well?
Yeah, it was really clear to see the two pairing so well. They both sort of elevate one another, Passive House and prefab, and the quality that Passive House demands from construction is really captured in the manufacturing control of a prefab process. It all starts with, the first thing we do when we get a set of drawings from an architect is we build this parts-based model, which is different from what the model that the architect is working with. Usually that's coming from like Revit or something. And that's more about looking at walls as volumes. Our model is parts-based, which means that we're building every single 2x4, every single joist, every single hanger that attaches to a joist. We're building everything. And then we're using this information to do clash detection. We're importing our MEP systems and just building this model on steroids that is the ultimate coordination device. And, we're able to catch issues that might otherwise not be caught until the building's under construction. We're able to recognize any issues in this digital model and address them and do it correctly and do it cheaper and faster. So there's definitely a quality that prefab introduces that just pairs so beautifully with the demands of Passive House.
Well, it gives you quite a bit of control back to, even for the architects. So this model becomes, for us, a lot of times becomes a communication piece. And then you can actually have conversations with the architect, with the builder, and everyone can kind of look at the same thing and make decisions before anything gets built, right? And, thinking about gaining a little bit more control before things happen on site, that has to happen with Passive House too, right? Because you have to really determine where the air barrier goes and how everything is connected, and comes down to sequencing a lot of times too, so that you don't miss specific steps. So I feel like the parts-based model just has such a big value for the overall construction process, build process.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. And then I guess another natural progression is going into more of a streamlined design approach with pre-manufactured or pre-designed homes, as you mentioned before. So where do you see the advantages and also the disadvantages in offering pre-designed homes?
What we're always trying to do in prefab is introduce efficiency and introduce standardization. And both of these are ultimately bringing down the cost of the process and improving the quality. You get a lot of quality out of repeatability. So every time we get a custom design from an architect, we're kind of starting from a blank canvas. We know how our system goes together. We just have to apply it to this custom design. So when I was hired, I was tasked with creating the pre-designed plans, but I was also new to prefab. And my first 6 months with Collective was a deep dive into this prefab system. It was like taking an intensive language course where I was just trying to learn this language of prefab. And I applied all of this information that I was gaining to these pre-designed plans, and they were really optimized. I mean, I had Yen and Rain, the founders of our company, on speed dial. And if I ever didn't know something or I wanted to say, hey, where's the best place for this window? They always had an opinion. And, they always preface it with, we can do anything, make it look good. We can do anything. But if you're really asking, here's how I'd love it done, here's the easy way. So that's kind of the product of the pre-designed plans are the product of all of that collaboration and having the founders of the company on speed dial. So there's definitely a lot of efficiency built in. And the repeatability is nice. Ideally, when we were designing these, the idea was somebody could hit, on our website, order this home, send it, it'll be shipped to your site in the spring of 2024. Done. Great. We've got the shop drawings, we've got the engineering, everything's ready to go. But of course, that's not really how it happens. And this is one of the cons that, you asked about. Everybody wants to customize. And of course, it makes sense if, I can relate if I was going to be building my own home at the Passive House quality, it's a big jump. It's, usually the largest purchase that a person makes in their life. And they intend to be in the home forever. So they're also designing for age and place and the next generation of their family. They want it done how they envision themselves using the space. And so everybody customizes. And what I always tell folks when they come to us to customize is it's great if you're only moving around interior partitions, you can reorganize bathrooms and the kitchen, but please leave the shell, leave the building enclosure as it is. That's where we have the efficiency built in. But, I don't think we've seen a single case of that yet. Everybody's like, oh, but, maybe just 6 more inches on the western wall. And, oh, okay, sure. So we have not yet had the luxury of having just somebody hit print on our shop drawings for the pre-designed homes and, that's it, done. But, I'm hopeful. And we do have this sort of disclaimer with every new client that comes to us that if you're going to be customizing one of our pre-designed plans, then we will be offering this to future clients. This becomes one of our pre-designed plans because the goal is not creating new shop drawings, not creating new order lists, just hit print.
I have heard that before from other prefabrication companies that having pre-designed homes is sort of a great leaping off point, but that, as you said, everybody wants to customize. And the reasons that you spoke about are understandable. Yeah.
You have several models that you are showing on the website with different sizes, and they all have very interesting names. Can you tell us a little bit more about specific designs and their names?
Yeah. So we have 3 base models, and they are, this is another way that we were trying to introduce efficiency is we have 3 floor plans, 3 different sizes, and the way that we introduced a little bit of variation in the design is just by changing what the roof is doing. So some designs have a gable roof, some have a low flat roof, some of them have a steep shed roof, but the building footprint stays the same. And it creates a totally different look for each of them. So, and the names that you're getting at are, I'm a big Tolkien fan, thanks to my husband, who introduced me to the great world of Middle Earth. And so I was reading the series while I was designing these homes. And so the names are actually Elvish words straight out of Tolkien's dictionary. So Parian is the smallest design, and it literally translates in this made-up language to the little one. And then Kalina is the middle one. It's 1,500 square feet, and that translates to sun-warmed, something like this. And then Asta is the largest model, and that translates to tower because it's our only 2-story design. So just a little bit of fun. We're trying to think of fun versions of names and something that would give us the opportunity to expand on. And you've got the entire Tolkien Elvish dictionary at your disposal. So that's what we did.
I'm sure it's a conversation starter with your clients.
Yes. A lot of people who are Passive House nerds are also a little bit of Tolkien nerds too. Mm-hmm. So
I just wanted to follow up real quickly on if you when clients demand changes, are you the point person then?
Yeah, I am. I'm currently the only designer in Collective. So I do all of the client interaction for the Collective homes and all of the customizations. So it works pretty well right now, but we're definitely seeing a lot of demand. And I would say we're currently a little bit over capacity, which is great. It's great to see that this product is in demand. We want to keep the momentum going. So we are looking for other designers. If there's any passionate folks out there, send me an email. But and we've also started doing custom home design, entirely custom. And that was really a product of somebody came to us and they thought they wanted the Kalina pre-designed plan, and then it just sort of evolved into a fully custom house. And so we said, well, this is working out pretty well. Let's just offer this in-house too.
Right.
One of the customization ways that I could easily imagine somebody wanting is, you mentioned that you guys ship all the way, on the West Coast of US and Canada. And, that's encompasses a lot of different climates. So I just would love to hear you speak about how, because I know you guys have homes in relatively mild climates like California, coastal California areas, and also, much colder climates. So it's quite a range. How do you customize for different climates?
Yeah, we have a few different panel assembly types. I already mentioned the I-joist one, but we also recently came out with something that we've created in-house, really as an attempt to reduce the cost of our panel system, because I-joists are really expensive. So we were trying to find out a way to manufacture our own I-joists in-house, and we developed this, what we're calling the C-joist, which we just create the whole joist in-house. And the other advantage, it definitely introduces some more cost effectiveness, but it's also more variable in its depth than your typical I-joist, 9.5 inches, 11/7/8, and 14, and so on. So you're less variable there. The C-joist we create in-house, so the webbing can be as deep as we want it to be, and the smallest that we can go is 6 inches, and with dense packed cellulose, and then it can go quite deep. So we're able to introduce a little bit of variation in our wall assembly, and then of course our roof panels are also just I-joists. We don't use our C-joist on those, but there's some thickness options. And then for the occasional project, we do have like a typical 2x8 wall panel with wood fiber board. We're doing a lot less of that, and we're actually trying to get away from that because we like the I-joist outrigger wall so much. It's sort of our bread and butter.
And then do you offer energy modeling with each of your homes? Is that part of it? And also, would you go through certification as well?
When we were designing the the collective homes in-house, we were using PHPP to inform the designs. So we have a couple of models, but they're not, they're definitely not modeled to the level that would get certified because there's so many variables based on the site. So we kind of just plugged in the information we knew, used a general region, and just gut checks, making sure that we're hitting a lot of the targets that these models were designed to hit. But I am Passive House certified, and I have the training to do energy modeling, but we just do not have capacity in-house. We are focusing on getting as many projects prefabbed as possible. So my attention is really going into creating the designs, in drawing form. But we always love to get projects certified. It's a nice way to do a little check-in and make sure our system is performing the way we want it to. And so anytime a project gets certified, it's not in-house by us. It's by an outside consultant usually. But of course, the construction is so important to be verified. So we are a big part of the certification process. For example, we have camera stations set up in our shop where we take construction process photos. So, and we send that out to every project, whether it gets certified or not, as just a nice way to show the homeowner, because by the time we show up on their site to install the panels, everything's wrapped, taped, closed. You can't see inside of it. So it's a nice thing to give the homeowner. It's like, oh yeah, and also here's what's inside of your panels. And then of course, our guys are the ones who also do the install. I've heard of some panel manufacturers who will just manufacture the panels and then send them to site, and that's the last time they touch them. We do all of our own installs, and we do invite the general contractor and his team if they want to help participate in the install. But it's really important that we have our own team on site doing the install, because we want to make sure, it's one thing that they're built correctly, but it's another that they're installed correctly. And once everything's installed, if there's any gaskets missing or any little funny corners that didn't get installed quite right, it could jeopardize the performance of the system. So we find it valuable to do all of our own installs.
Yeah. And quickly going back to the certification, it's actually, it would be quite hard for you to go through certification because you are basically one piece of the whole. You don't necessarily have control over the window selection or the systems and all of that. So I think it does make a lot of sense to basically have someone who's more connected to the architect or the project itself to go through certification.
Yeah, we act as a subcontractor.
You talked about shop. Can you talk a little bit about what's in the shop? Because I understand that you guys have gotten newer equipment lately, and also so I'm curious to hear about that and what it does and why you got that new equipment, and also where you're putting it. Are you having plans to expand into a larger facility, or maybe you already have expanded into a larger facility?
Yeah, we are. So our current shop is in Invermere, British Columbia. It's 3,000 square feet, and we're still completely manual operation. We're producing about 18 single-family homes per year, but we are in the design process of upgrading our shop to about 12,000 square feet. And we're in the process of rezoning land and going through all the steps to make it happen. Part of that, we got some really fun semi-automated equipment to help us with that. Our main goal is just volume output. How much can we produce per year that's at quality while our crew is safe? So semi-automated equipment is, fortunately for us, it's pretty attainable, because while this is still really new in North America, they've been doing this for decades in Europe. So we're a couple of our team, Ian and Rain, the co-founders of Collective, went to Europe, I think a year and a half ago, just to do a prefab construction tour and see how other shops are, organizing their assembly lines, what equipment they're using, what software they're using for integration. And we're learning from people who have already, figured it out the hard way. And then we get to sort of pick our favorite parts and put it all together in our own shop. So that's the process we're in right now. We just got some equipment from Technowood and Weinman, which are both, Europe brands from Europe. And we're doing all this really because we won a grant a little while ago from Clean BC. And they just said, keep doing what you're doing. So we want to do more. And so that was really, really lucky. And with our new shop, we hope to produce, maybe 40 single family homes a year, give or take. And with that new shop, we'll also be able to introduce multifamily projects, sort of scaling up the type of work that we do.
That's great. I was going to ask you about multifamily. I know that you guys might be working on a multifamily project with Tess Bradley.
Yeah, Artisans Group office is underway right now. And fortunately for us, they like working with us because we really like working with them. Artisans Group is incredible, really smart group of gals over there. And the more projects we do together, the easier it gets. There's a bit of a learning curve getting into prefab, but we've done enough projects with people like Tessa and Rusa that it goes really smoothly. So we feel honored that they've asked us to prefab their new office, which ground floor is going to be office, and then above it an apartment building. Yeah,
that's exciting.
It is.
I have another question, follow-up question on your pre-designed homes. So does that like if a client comes to you and basically, the idea is to just click a button and order and, the house gets delivered. But in reality, is that realistic, or every client needs a builder on site. Like it's not that, because Collective Carpentry is just a piece of it. So they need a builder who is basically preparing the site and contracting with you and receiving the panels and then finishing everything out. Is that the same on the architecture side? Because you're not necessarily specifying the system, or, are there things that an additional architect is needed for, or permitting, or is that something that you can all do?
Yeah, you're right that our construction scope is limited to the high performance building enclosure that is above grade. Our collective design services are different in that the drawings will be holistic. So it's important to show every plumbing fixture, even though we're not installing them. It's even important to show, the exterior finishes and everything to make sure that the building gets built correctly, looks good, and it's holistic. But the one piece that we do not do is building permitting. And that's because we work across so many jurisdictions that it's impossible to really grasp every single one and understand. So fortunately, we haven't seen this as a hurdle. We tell people straight away, you need to find somebody for doing your permitting. This can be yourself if it's, a really small rural jurisdiction that you're working with and you feel comfortable with that. It can be sometimes general contractors are willing to take it on. We found there's local draftsmen that are happy to do it. And, the most expensive scenario would be hiring a local architect just to take the drawings over from us when we're done with the design and do the permit. We haven't done a pre-designed home in a rural, in an urban area yet. And I think that would be quite difficult to do without a local architect. But otherwise, we have not seen this as a hurdle.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. Even like just meeting code, like the codes, for example, in Seattle with seismic is very different than the code here on the East Coast, we don't really have to worry about that. But that's all included in your scope, because you in your scope, you have engineering incorporated.
We have engineering for what can be engineered without a site. So you still need to hire a structural engineer to build one of the pre-designed homes. And that is for, just as you say, the seismic codes of the local area, snow loads, wind loads, they all need to be custom to where your site is.
I know in Washington State where you live and in California where I live, there's a lot of easy permitting for ADUs at this point. How small is the smallest pre-designed home? Is that a market you're addressing?
The smallest collective home we have is 1,200 square feet, which is a little bit larger than what you would typically see in a backyard cottage style. But yeah, we've talked a lot about it, and we've thought about offering it as a design. We've built a couple that were, from custom architects. But I think our approach to the collective homes is put a first round out, see what kind of attention they get, see how easy the process is. And then if we're seeing it as successful, then we can build out this department. And we're seeing it as successful. It's just not going exactly how we thought it would, with all those customizations. So now we're kind of shifting gears and thinking about, well, how we definitely want to build out this design side of collective carpentry. What's the right approach? And I'm really glad that we didn't go full speed ahead and do here's 10, 20 different designs. What do you want? We started out with 3 base models, getting some feelers. So what we're thinking right now is a good path forward is that we want to offer controlled customization. And you can think of this really similarly to the auto industry, where you buy a car that has a base model, and then you can do all of these sort of upgrades and add little additions. You can choose the color of your car and the sports package and all these other options, but everything is controlled. You don't go to the mechanic and start designing your car from scratch. So in prefab, we're really trying to introduce a similar efficiency. So controlled customization, I think, is going to be our next approach. And there's a prefab company on the East Coast that I think is doing this really, really well. So kind of learning from other people in the industry, how they're doing it. Everybody has their own approach, but it seems like controlled customization is how we should move forward. So still giving people a way to customize to their lifestyle choices, but within the confines of the efficiency that we've built into our system.
So a lot of those thoughts that you just described are actually going into a session that you're going to present at the Passive House Network conference end of September, beginning of October. And the title of the session is actually the All-American Home, New and Improved. And I'm excited that I'm actually going to be the moderator for you and Craig and Lucas Johnson from Valley Homes. And I'm just really excited about the session itself. Can you give us a little bit of a preview?
Yeah, I was honored to be invited to present. I really admire the work that Lucas Johnson is doing. And Craig and I, we work at Collective Carpentry together, and he's our business development guy. I'm on the design side. So it's a fun little collaboration of the three of us. And a big focus is on embodied carbon and the importance of pairing that with Passive House. And of course, prefab. So part of my presentation is giving a preview of what we're calling the prefab design guide. And this is an attempt to bridge the gap between the architects designing and the builders who are building. There's a disconnect in the industry, and prefab really has an ability to bridge this gap. And one of our attempts to be this bridge is with our design guide, trying to eliminate another hurdle of getting people on board with prefab. So the design guide is a resource for architects to integrate a design with our system. And we like to say that you can build just about anything with our prefab system, But of course, there's the easy way and the hard way. So the design guide is trying to inform people how to do it the easy way. And then, of course, in the presentation, I make my case for why the combination of Passive House and prefab provides the scalability and quality that a new era of American building will demand.
Yeah, it sounds like a panel not to be missed.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm also very excited to actually meet you in person there in Denver.
Yes, we've all been hanging out over Zoom calls for the last few years. It'll be nice to see some faces in person.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been really great conversation.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
And that was Heather Mott, who is the designer, a part of the design team at Collective Carpentry. Fantastic interview. And I love the fact that Passive House Accelerator is bringing people together. That's quite the story. Let's go to you, Ilka, first. What were you've worked a bit with Heather, as you mentioned. What did you take out of that interview?
Well, I haven't had the pleasure to actually work with her directly, because typically our relationship to Collective Carpentry is that we do the panel designs or the parts-based model that she mentions in the interview, and then Collective Carpentry actually builds the panels for our projects. So it's been a really, really nice relationship to have with them. And yeah, I mean, I think I was just really excited about just hearing more about their model homes, actually, because that's something that is just, I think, a natural progression into like trying to standardize the design effort a little bit more. Yeah, I do think that it's always a little, the conversation around model homes, it's always a very interesting one, because everyone really, really wishes it to be this push a button and print scenario. But as we talked about, it's not always quite that simple, because you have to adapt to so many different regions and codes. And that's something that sometimes gets forgotten a little bit, that you still have to engage a local builder, sometimes even an architect, a structural engineer. So every project, or most of the projects, have to be adjusted towards the local building code or requirements, or just, getting the site ready to actually deliver the model home there. Yeah.
This was a really good follow-up from last week's interview that we had with Mike Anderson of Passive Design Solutions. If people haven't checked that out, because that's their thing, is a library of standard plans and a catalog. And we talked a lot about the fact that as much as you try and stick to that plan, there are often changes. I quite like what Heather was saying, that they have an agreement where if they make a change, then that new plan just becomes part of the library. So you'd like to think that over time, eventually you get to a limited number of changes, but there are always sort of tweaks and some sort of customization. I really like the idea of and I've heard this before, in liking houses to cars, where you have what she called controlled customization. So you still have the core elements which are fixed, but you have some sort of add-ons that you can pick and mix a little bit for customer preference. Mary, what did you think?
Well, I just, of course, loved hearing the story about Passive House Accelerator's influence on her career. That was really, it's exactly what we'd like to be doing at the Accelerator, is encouraging community and encouraging Passive House growth. But speaking of growth, the other really exciting thing that I thought was their upcoming expansion that they're working on, and how they're going from manual assembly of the panels to incorporating a little more automation in a larger facility and being able to grow their company.
Yeah, Yeah, that's there's some impressive numbers, and the other thing I took out from that is I've seen, unfortunately, some prefab companies come and go in this part of the world because it makes so much sense as an idea, and then people kind of try and ramp up and then wonder why no one's buying, or they become overcapitalized and they can't keep up with demands. One of the success stories, I think, of things like Collective Carpentry is they've grown at a sustainable rate over the last year. I mean, I actually interviewed these guys back in 2016 on my Homestyle Green podcast. I've just looked it up, episode 149. So over that time, they've sort of just maintained a really good level of productivity and work, and they've obviously grown their team, which is fantastic, bringing Heather and now others on board as well. So I think it's exciting going to that next level up to sort of 40 houses per year, but it's not something that a small business should necessarily try and do overnight. And I think there's a lot to be said for sort of bedding in systems and making sure that you are sustainable long term before you grow, and then not growing too fast. But also, I agree, it's fantastic to be able now to scale up, to be doing multi-unit development. Very, very cool. Something else, I'm always interested about prefab and the automatic assumption that prefab is good, and also the automatic assumption that wood is good. I know that there's some hooks in there. One of the things that I've also witnessed here is the use of prefabrication just to do standard design, standard construction quicker, and that's not necessarily a good outcome. One of the things I like about Collective Carpentry is that she said that their very, what they call basic specification is still twice the local standard. So that's a really good way of ensuring you're getting the efficiency benefits of the production of prefabrication, but you're also getting a very good quality and high performing product as well. I've got so many other thoughts. It was just such a great interview, but anything else from either of you?
Well, I think so. I'm actually really excited to be the moderator on a session where she is presenting on the Passive House Network conference in Denver soon. And one of the things she said she's going to talk about is that they developed a design guide to bridge the gap between architects and builders. And yeah, I think that's just such an interesting topic and so relevant to prefabrication, because once you decide to do prefabrication, you can't really live in your bubbles. How sometimes, it's the case in regular construction, because you have to communicate so early on, and you have this parts-based model that all of a sudden you have to communicate with, and you solve a lot of issues up front, but that requires basically bridging these gaps, right? And coming up with a design guide where everyone has access to, just having the conversation up front. I think it's just such a huge benefit of prefabrication, and I think it's great that they're addressing it.
That was a new term for me, parts-based model. I'm assuming that means modeling like a BIM model down to very minute detail.
Well, the parts-based model is actually a little bit different than a BIM model, because mostly, especially on the architecture side, the BIM model is a volumetric model where you convey design intent, right? That's mostly an architect's tool, but it's really hard to really go down into modeling every stud at every screw. That's not necessarily what like a Revit or Vectorworks software is designed to do. So what you do with prefabrication, you actually turn a volumetric model into a parts-based model. So you're filling basically all the volumes with actual parts.
Right.
The software that we use, and as well as Collective Carpentry, is CADwork, and it's a really, really great program to basically model every single piece, but then also taking it a step further and making machine files, for example, out of it, so that it can be a fabricated assembly or a component.
Yeah, and she mentioned looking for clashes. So I guess when you get down to that detail, you can see where things are like services are crossing over, or structural elements are in the same place that you need your plumbing to be.
Yeah, and that's something that you can't necessarily do with a volumetric model because you don't have all your parts in it, right? So all of a sudden, once you have all your studs and beams and all the load paths in your model, now you can also integrate all the MEP and everything else that goes into a building, and you can see where there are clashes, and you can address it very, very early on and move parts or address it and find solutions before anything gets built on site.
Yeah, and totally avoiding that the builder just figuring things out on the fly, which I know is pretty common practice and not ideal.
Yeah, and as the architect, a lot of times you can't really do anything about it anymore, right? Because you're not always on site. So that's why I always say this parts-based model actually gives the architect quite a bit of control back, because he can address those clashes early on, and you can actually find a creative solution for them instead of just reacting on site. And you're basically at the mercy of the builder or whoever is on site at that moment, because construction has to keep moving.
I can imagine that model also being really useful for when we're getting into embodied carbon calculations as well, because you'd have such good detail about the materials.
Yeah. So what we do, because we create a lot of these parts-based model, is that we attach, or what you can do is you attach attributes to every single part, and you know exactly what the amount of these parts are and how big they are. And then if you know exactly what the carbon or, whatever you want to attach to those parts, you have a list, right? You have an output of lists of whatever
quantities,
information you want to know. And it becomes a really good tool for all of everything accounting.
For architects, I imagine, not that I am one, but it moves a lot of the decisions up front, and that you might otherwise, particularly in single family homes, be making later, just sort of gradually in the process, but instead you got to make them earlier. And that's a different process to get used to.
Yeah,
and it actually affects your contract too. So when we start working with architects, we always let them know that typically your construction administration that comes at the end of your contract basically moves to the front. And depending on how you bill for that, you might want to rethink this, because it's quite different, that process.
Heather talked about having her builder on speed dial. Now, that's obviously easy when the builder happens to be your boss, but it also made me think about that concept of communicating with the person who's going to be putting the building together really early and throughout the process, and that is a luxury when you're design and build effectively. But it also points out that the importance of having that relationship with the builder. And also, I guess the flip side of that is the downside of having a classic kind of tender type arrangement of designing a project through the design phase and then going out to find a general contractor to build it, without that person being involved at the outset. And then even just the example she gave of saying, well, we can put in windows anywhere, but this is where we'd prefer to put them as the builder. And that's a really useful piece of information to say, well, as a designer, I'm because you might be happy as a designer with both. You can make either work. So if you know that what the builder's preference is in that specific situation, then you get a much better complete outcome that's going to work for both parties. It just makes a lot of sense in that context. But I can also see that in a lot of other situations, you just don't necessarily have that open communication between designer, builder, and ideally other parties involved, like the the owner or facilities manager, whoever's going to be looking after the building as well. The more people can have involved in that, and the better. Awesome. Anything else to close up? We'll definitely put some links so where people can get in more information about that panel discussion, Ilka, because that's going to be I think great, and that's part of the Passive House Network. Is that a conference? I think there's a conference coming up in Colorado, isn't it? The Passive House one.
Yes, it's the annual Passive House Network conference in Denver, Colorado.
Yeah, you're just picking all these beautiful places to go and hang out. You too, I think.
Yeah, I've never been in Denver. I'm excited.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. I'm also going to suggest that we put a link to heating, cooling, and lighting. I love the fact that that was Heather's epiphany moment instead of The Alchemist, but that sounds like it was a pretty influential book for her. Probably not for everyone, but and a little bit technical, but I'll put a link to that so that people can check that out, because it's a pretty good resource. Awesome. Hey, well, thank you very much, Mary and Ilka. I always appreciate you finding great women doing things in the industry, and you've certainly done that this time. So I really enjoyed that, listening to that interview. So thank you very much for that. We'll be back again next week. So looking forward to chatting with everyone then, and we should have Zach back as well. So until then, we'll catch you up next week, and we'll be back on the Passive House podcast.